No, no buzz. A Just Bees book club. Today, actually, partially, literally today, I read Mad World by Misha Frazer-Carroll, 2023 from the Outspoken series by Pluto Press. Both the series and press I'm unfamiliar with other than this book. Although I think I've seen other books in the series. I've not read anything else, and none of the listed books at the front here. Um, Striking is like it's something I immediately understand or like recognize. Um, Part of my ongoing sort of faux resolution to read one nonfiction book per month in the year of 2024, which I am considering abandoning because I'm running up. This is maybe just the books I've been picking. Maybe it's just a me problem. It's a publishing problem. It's all these things. I'm sure in many ways. I'm running up against this issue where I find books on topics that I'm like, I would really love to know more about that, and then I pick up a book and I realize it's an introduction to the topic, and I don't need an introduction to the topic. I need a slightly next level conversation about it. Um, that is how I felt about the Kaba book. That's how I felt. The first one. There was another one already this year that I read. It's on some level how I feel about Mad World. Subtitle is The Politics of Mental Health. Um, and there's a lot of really good stuff in this. I think these are the best of the ones I've read so far this year. In this little mini series of my own, I think there's a lot going for it. I think getting to the end of it made me appreciate the structure maybe a little more than I did as I was sort of like flipping through it and also it's just extremely readable. It is very like straightforwardly written. There are references to more difficult concepts and bits of jargon-ish language, but nothing that overwhelms the the sort of readability of the text, which I think is a feat in and of itself. That is like an important piece of craft to acknowledge. When I'm just saying like, oh yeah, I kind of already knew this already. Like that doesn't mean it's easy to communicate these things. That I know for sure. Hi, Just Bees Book Club. Um, but yes, so sort of my big takeaway while reading this is an introduction. And it's an introduction to a number of things, right? It is about mental health or slash madness. Frazer-Carroll very specifically makes an argument for it and almost exclusively refers to um, the things that are being spoken about as capital M madness slash mental health or mental illness. Um, no, I'm not. No, yeah, madness slash mental illness is the sort of repeated bit of jargon here. That is to say, a term that is defined early on and used extensively for reasons both not semantic, but what's the other linguistic term? Uh, Pragmatism, sort of linguistically pragmatic, meaning not just like the denotative content of a word, but the sort of connotative content of a word, the social meaning rather than the quote unquote dictionary meaning, right? Uh, there's a sort of linguistic pragmatic element to the use of jargon, meaning it is a way of engaging with the contextual meaning rather than just again, yeah, etc., 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 etc. I've been thinking about linguistics again one of these days. Yeah, madness slash mental illness. It does that work. a thing think I think my first sort of big takeaway from this book was it's interestingly a book that is footnoted, which is not a kind of book I read very often, although I guess I did just reread House of Leaves. That's kind of like the main footnoted style of book that I read. Much more likely to read things with chapter notes or end notes. The footnoting thing was interesting, and I think it foregrounded as hey, shout out to the Range Touch Network, Game Study Buddies, a fantastic podcast. But as Cameron Kunzelman on that show often refers to, it really foregrounded the citational apparatus of this book to me, which is another thing that I think helped me come to a better place with the book, ultimately speaking, but that kind of was a bit of friction initially where I would say probably 90% of the footnotes in this are links to articles on the internet. So those are, Guardian articles. These are, I don't think there's any new inquiry in there specifically, but like, The Atlantic is in here, stuff like that. And the reason I say that sort of foregrounding of the citational apparatus was helpful to me is because when I picked this book up, I just saw that it was a book called Mad World by Micha Frazer-Carroll, The Politics of Mental Health. And then, sort of the back of the book blurb, right? Mental health is a political issue, but we often discuss it as a personal one. How is the current mental health crisis connected to capitalism, racism, and other social issues? In a different world, how might we transform the ways that we think about mental health, diagnosis, and treatment? These are some of the big questions Micha Frazer-Carroll asks as she reveals mental health to be an urgent political concern that needs deeper understanding beyond today's, quote, awareness-raising, end quote, campaigns. Basically what I read. But like that first sentence of the blurb, but we often discuss it in personal ones, was like, I think probably the biggest thing for me. I was like, I probably would benefit from this a lot. And so I didn't really think through what sort of the approach would be. And it became very clear very quickly because of the footnotes and because of the fact that they are all URLs to reputable news sources, that this is a political book by a journalist. And I looked into it and I was correct, because it is written very much with a journalist style and tendencies in like reporting. There are interviews in this book with folks who have dealt with or been dealt harm by the psychological institutions. It is a UK focused book, which happens. Silly. But when I first sort of recognized that, and then I went on to confirm it, I was like, oh dang it, that's not really what the vibe I got from the cover and back of the book blurbs was. That was like not my that was not what I thought I was getting into going in. And the fact that the book, through again literally just the footnotes, and then sort of because of that initial spark, me doing a little closer reading of like what the style of writing was, allowed me to get to the point where I was like, oh, this is a journalist. This is journalism. This is a long form journalism that is not engaged with things topically in the way much journalism is forced to. So like, I'm not saying this is this could have been it's why in book when it could have been an article. I don't think it could have been an article based on the economics of pitching things. I think that it is a book and it should be a book, but it is highly informed by practices of journalism for better and worse. And knowing that or piecing that together, it made me much more able to sort of take it on its own terms, rather than be like, okay, so why this book starts with a history of asylums. It's a pretty good history as far as I can tell. I'm not completely unaware of the history of asylums, but I'm certainly not anything close to an expert. Um, but there was definitely moments where I was like, okay, that you could linger here for a second. You could like let this kind of, you could roll this one out a little bit further, and just the style and what it actually is, which is an introduction to the politics of mental health in many ways. Um, so both the style and the sort of assumed readership slash end goal all coagulated to make this thing a thing that didn't 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 take me out, you know. And there's other things. I think there's like a really good sort of undercurrent of sort of like a Marxian political economy analysis of everything that also like ends up hitting up against, because of the things I just discussed, like certain pet peeves of mine, like moments where Frazer-Carroll will make a argument that is like very clearly applicable to capitalism as as the mode of production, as a historical mode of production, and then say the word neoliberal capitalism, where it's just like neoliberalism is a specific thing. Like the point you're making is actually is very useful, but is also true about a society which is organized by the fact that the means of production are privately owned and are used to, you know, produce commodities that make the owners of the meaner means of production more money, whereas the people who don't own them have to sell their labor in order to be given wages in order to, you know, consume commodities. I don't need to get it. I don't need to do this. I don't need to do this. I'm tired. I've had a very long week. I'm not convincing anybody. I don't need to. Because this is a Just Bees book club. Right, B? Right. But there's good bits of sort of, let's say there's good bits of political economy sort of like interwoven through the arguments here. The neoliberalism thing, you know, the neoliberalism is a very specific historical project that, you know, began in the 70s and has deep inflections on capitalism. It doesn't start in the 70s. It's theorized in the 20s and 30s at the University of Chicago. Stop it. B, stop it. Okay. There's a lot of there's a good historical analysis that is happening here, sort of between the lines a lot of the time, while still making this book extremely readable. I was, I think, probably a little more than halfway through this book when I just decided this morning, like, okay, I'm just gonna knock it out, because I just kind of felt like finishing it. So I could do this, and I could, and I did, and I, you know, I finished it in probably like 2 to 3 hours. The back half, maybe 4 hours, but like very leisurely hours where I wasn't just like dig. I was like standing up and pacing a little bit. I was sort of trying to think through some of the arguments that Frazer-Carroll makes, and yeah. Yeah, it all has a bunch of little rabbit holes. There's useful stuff, like useful like historical stuff in here that I like didn't know about. The SPK comes up a bunch, and I've just blanked on what that acronym stands for. But it's like the histories of things like the Mental Patients Union and the anti-psychiatry movement of the 70s, and the complicated things that both entailed and grew into, and, you know, led to in future. I think I saw a might do in here at one point where I was like, oh yeah, that's one of my favorite Britishisms personally. Having just said in future, you know. Anyway, yeah, I think I'll probably, I think I'll probably write a little blurb for this at work or whatever, and just be like, yeah, if you don't know a ton about disability justice, this is probably a really useful thing for you. Because that is sort of one of the major frameworks is disability justice also, which, hey, that's cool. Um, I think I have thought about disability visibility. The essay collection edited by Alice Wong is sort of my like first disability justice text, and that's a book that I think is extremely good in many ways, and then has a handful of things that are just bad. Not bad, but like I don't know. I don't know. And I think I would recommend this as an introduction over that in some ways. The problem is that this is more. I mean, it is very explicitly and intentionally engaged with the, as I said, madness slash mental illness perspective that does sort of bring in other aspects of disability justice and talks about the ways that these can intersect. I guess there's one thing I do still feel like talking about, even after having kind of decided that I didn't want to. But to finish my first point, on some level, I would probably recommend this as an initial text, or I would be happy with having read this as one of the first things I read about disability justice. Maybe more than disability visibility on some level. This is not to put them in competition with each other, obviously. I'm just trying to think through my own understanding of, you know, a movement. I mean, I think I talked about disability pride on this one, and I think this is like in there as well. And then the point of this book in many ways, and most all good disability justice things that I've read, is that like the fundamental point is solidarity and like not putting these things in competition with each other, not putting pathologization and disability in competition with each other, but also just works and people, and that's just a thing that I tend to agree with. Again, just kind of trying to think through on my own terms. Anyway, I can do that when I'm not on camera. There's one thing that I got to sort of near the end of this that was, I think, indicative of a thing that happens a number of times throughout the book, where Frazer-Carroll talks about the historical solidarity between queer movement building, or queer activism, queer movements, and disability movements, that, or specifically madness movements, that gets sort of talked about in relation to, there's a specific reference to the fact that I think in like the early 60s or early 70s, the DSM depathologized homosexuality, and the way that led to a sort of break in some of the earlier solidarities between queer movement and madness movement. Specifically, I think was in relation to the psychiatric survivors movement in the 70s, or like early 70s, I want to say, late 60s. But Frazer-Carroll mentions that there is a when the I think it's actually not the DSM, but it's the APA, the American Psychological Association, depathologizes homosexuality, and that leads to a significant decrease in the compulsory straightness shit. The the straight camp shit, and then the result of that being that sort of natural solidarity between queer folks and mad folks or disabled folks sort of disappears for a time. And then Frazer-Carroll sort of goes on to point out that like that there is no. I really should just be citing this. I really should have just written this down because I thought about it a lot of the time, as in 4 hours ago or whatever, and then I didn't write it down because like I'm not going to have enough to say about this, and then now I am saying about this. But to risk a paraphrase, Frazer-Carroll talks about how we should not like utilize depathologization or the this is 1 second. The broad argument is that the solidarity is the thing, and that we when we're divided we lose is sort of the implication. It's not the words used, but I just remember I just had the thought, and I think this is a thought that comes up a lot to me in this book in many ways. I think because it is very introductory, and I think it's a useful term, but it kind of got me a little bit. Is that there's something along the lines of like, you know, when we are not in solidarity with each other, there's like we don't win, which I think is morally completely accurate. I think strategically completely accurate, and I think is tactically deeply undermined by the example just given like a few pages before, right? Like this is the difficulty of movement building in many ways, right? You form coalitions, and then sometimes one of the tools in destroying those coalitions is giving a tactical win that is huge for some people, some amount of that coalition, some aspect of that movement. And it seems foolish, I think, not on Frazer-Carroll's part specifically. Again, I think this book is doing a very specific thing, but this is a refrain I see often, that like the only way to win is together, and to ignore the many historical examples where that wedge can be driven not by the way it is usually driven, which is things like the cops beating the shit out of us, or sending us to prison, or, you know, surveillance, or etc., but through that sort of positive reinforcement, quote unquote, right? Like that there are tactical decisions made in the struggle that can be the right decision for a very large amount of people, that do fuck us, I think is I don't know, thing I was thinking about. That's what the show is. This book club is. That's what this book club is. That's things I was thinking about. It's just for bees. Fuck. Alright, thanks for not watching.